left her body dead and bleeding and crumpled at the bottom of the stairs to her own basement. Shirley Merritt, the victim, was 77 years old at the time of her death. She was the defendant's very own mother. Now, if Shirley Merritt were alive today, she would have just celebrated her 50th Mother's Day as the defendant's mother. And during the course of this trial, you are going to learn a lot about Shirley. And I think that the theme that you will see is that she was somebody who was always giving of herself. She could have retired years before, but because she loved her job in patient and family services at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, she continued to work there until the day of her death. She was the kind of person that if you were her friend and if it was your birthday, she would have made you one of her famous bundt cakes. She loved cooking meals for her family. She loved going to her grandson Jack's games and band concerts. But the person that she probably gave the most to was her youngest son, Richard. Now, the defendant had been an attorney here in the Atlanta area, and it was Shirley who gave him the funds to set up his own practice. On the outside, everything looked fine for the defendant. He was married to his wife, Janine, who was a veterinarian here in town. He had 2 kids, both of whom were in private school, and he had his own law practice and was in court in Cobb County all the time. But it was discovered that he had violated the trust of his mother, of his wife, of his kids, and of many of his clients. Starting sometime in 2014-15, several of his clients started coming out of the woodwork, reporting that he was stealing from them. Cobb County investigated the charges and found that he had, in fact, stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars and defrauded many of his clients, most of whom were elderly. They charged him with a 34-count indictment with several counts of theft by taking, various degrees of forgery, and exploitation of elderly victims. Finally, the defendant was arrested by Cobb County, and it was his mother, Shirley, who put up the money to bail him out of jail. Janine, having learned of this ongoing deception, asked for a divorce, and it was Shirley who opened the door to her home in Stone Mountain for the defendant to have a place to live. Now, as you learned during the course of this trial, Shirley was truly disappointed in her son. She was not pleased with his actions, but still, she was his mother, and she wasn't about to let him sit in jail or live on the street. Finally, on January 18th of 2019, exactly 2 weeks before the day of the murder, the defendant faced a Superior Court judge in Cobb County and entered a guilty plea to all 34 counts on the Cobb County indictment. The judge sentenced him to 15 years to serve. And for some reason, the judge decided to give him 2 weeks before he had to turn himself into the jail. He gave him 2 weeks to get his affairs in order before spending 15 years in the Department of Corrections custody. However, there were some caveats to that. First of all, the defendant had to wear an ankle monitor so that the court system could keep tabs on his whereabouts to prevent him from running. The defendant continued to live in Shirley's house during this period of time. And I'm going to tell you, Shirley was an emotional person, and she was distraught over the fact that Her son had been convicted of these charges, and over the fact that her son was going to go away for some time. But still, she wasn't going to let him live on the streets for these 2 weeks. Shirley confided in a close family member who's going to testify. He's going to be the first witness the state calls today. His name is Mike Jeffcoat. Mike is a cousin of Shirley's husband. And even though Shirley's husband died several years before the murder, Shirley remained in close contact with him. They were exactly 10 years apart in age, and they just had a really good relationship. Mike Jeffcoat and his wife, Joan, lived in Birmingham. They still do. And Shirley would call him and text him, and you're going to see some of the distress in the text messages that she sent him during this 2-week period. Well, knowing that Shirley was going to likely be too emotional to drive her son to the jail, Jeffcoat suggested that he and Joan drive from Birmingham to Stone Mountain the morning of February 1st, which was the turning date, and that Mike would drive the defendants to Cobb County Jail, which is about 45 minutes away to an hour away, while Joan remained at home to keep Shirley company. They were even planning on spending the night because they didn't want Shirley to be alone. None of that ever happened. On the morning of February 1st, Mike Jeffcoat got what he considered to be a very uncharacteristic text message from Shirley. It said, "Mike, I wish you wouldn't come. Please come another weekend. Things are bad here." Mike was worried, but he knew that Shirley was somebody who was emotional, and he wanted to give Shirley and the defendants their privacy on that day. So he and Joan decided not to drive into Atlanta. Well, that text message was the last Mike Jeffcoat or anyone ever heard from Shirley. The next time Mike saw her was the next morning when he drove into Atlanta, went into her house, and found her dead at the bottom of the basement stairs. The defendant, in the meantime, never turned himself in to the Cobb County Jail at 5 o'clock, by 5 o'clock on February 1st. And by this time, he was gone, in the wind, not to be found until a nationwide manhunt uncovered him in Nashville, Tennessee, 8 months later. And we're going to talk about what he did during that period of time, during the course of the trial, and I'm going to get back to that in a few minutes. But let's go back to what happened to Shirley. The medical examiner found that she had been stabbed 4 times in the back, 1 time at the side. She had been stabbed under the right clavicle in the neck, which severed her jugular and caused her to bleed out. She was stabbed several times in the face, and the force was so strong, ladies and gentlemen, that the blade of that 9-inch knife lodged into the bones in her skull, and the handle broke off. But that wasn't enough, because laying next to her, crime scene investigators found a 35-pound dumbbell with blood and hair on the end. And the medical examiner found that the right side of her head had basically been bludgeoned. It had been bashed in to the point where the basal bones in her skull were shattered. Investigators arrived on the scene, and it was very clear to them that this had not been a case where an intruder came into the house and killed Shirley Merritt. There were no open or broken windows. All the doors were closed. There was no sign of forced entry or any tampering at all. All the furniture was upright. There were valuables that had not been stolen. In fact, Shirley Merritt's purse was still on the scene, and it had blank checks in it. What's more, the two weapons that were used weren't something that somebody had brought in. They came from inside the house. The knife with a 9-inch blade was a kitchen knife that came right out of Shirley Merritt's own knife block on her kitchen counter. The dumbbell was in storage, waiting in her basement, and you're going to actually see the mark on the carpet where it had been resting prior to the defendant picking it up and killing his mother with it. What's more, you know what Shirley had been doing when she was attacked and killed? She was cooking the defendant his last meal before he had turned himself in to the jail that afternoon. Investigators found spaghetti and Shirley's famous bolognese sauce, hot and cooking on the stove, along with a salad that she is about to toss and a loaf of garlic bread that she had just gotten out of the oven with the knife that he used to kill her. Where was the defendant all this time? Well, he went into hiding, but he wasn't hiding under a rock. He drove off out that day, and he went, we don't know where he went, but we know where he ended up. He went to Nashville, Tennessee, and he started a whole new life. He met people out there. He got a job at a bar. He started online dating, and in fact, met a woman who he started a relationship with. But just like his clients, and just like his wife and his kids and his mother, he lied to her as well. Because he lived under an alias the entire time he was out in Tennessee. And you know what? I'm going to tell you now, it's a ridiculous alias. So ridiculous that I'm not even going to tell you what it is. You'll hear it when the witnesses testify, and you're going to see the fake driver's license that he made with that name on it. He was arrested 8 months later, on September 30th of 2019 by Gerard Hunt and his team with the U.S. Marshal's Office after a nationwide manhunt. You know how they found him? He was driving Shirley Merritt's Lexus that he had stolen from her garage after he killed her. A few things I want to go over. First of all, something that's really important in this case is the timeline. And investigators were able to put together a very precise timeline. In fact, we know where the defendant was almost every minute of February 1st of 2019 because we have something that we don't have in a lot of homicide cases. As I told you, when the judge in Cobb County gave the defendant 2 weeks to turn himself in, he ordered him to wear an ankle monitor. So we're able to put tabs on the defendant's whereabouts almost the entire day until he cut his monitor off. That morning, the defendant woke up at his mother's house on Planters Row. Excuse me. He left the home at 8 a.m. His daughter, who is disabled, had an appointment with a neurologist, and the defendant agreed to go. It was kind of his last goodbye to his daughter, Mia, and he met his then-wife, now ex-wife, Janine, there. It was a doctor's appointment in Sandy Springs. He returned to the house on Planters Row at 9:38 that morning. Just 1 minute later, Mike Jeffcoat got again, what he considered to be a suspicious, uncharacteristic text from Shirley Merritt saying, things are real bad here, don't come. Now, you're going to see the text messages. They are a screenshot. The time on the text message actually says 8:39 a.m., but remember, that was, so he's going to explain to you that he actually did receive that at 8:39 a.m. Birmingham time, but it was actually 9:39 a.m., what would be considered Atlanta time. The defendant leaves the residence, according to the ankle monitor records, at 2:30 p.m. So we know that sometime between 9:38 and 2:30, Shirley started making lunch. She set the table for two, put the pot of bolognese sauce on the stove, cooked the spaghetti, but that meal was never touched because between those times, between 9:38 and 2:30, the defendant was at the house, and sometime during those hours, he killed Shirley Merritt. The defendant leaves the residence at 2:30, and he travels north up to Norcross. He stops at a Kroger just for a couple of minutes, probably to gas up on the way, and he arrives at a QT station in Norcross at 2:52 p.m. Detectives pulled the surveillance camera from that QT station, and you're going to have a chance to watch it during the course of that trial. And you know what's really interesting about that is that the defendant isn't in his own car, which had been left at the scene. And you'll see in photographs, he's driving Shirley Merritt's Lexus. It's kind of a dark gray color, kind of crossover SUV. It will be the second vehicle that you see pull into the QT entryway. You're going to see the defendant get out of the car. He is wearing a green shirt. It has a design on it that says Ecuador. He walks into the service station. He buys a couple of waters, a candy bar, pays cash, and then he leaves. He then travels west on I-285, and he travels north on I-75. At 4:12, the defendant exits I-75 onto the Cass White Road exit. And at 4:14, the ankle monitor company gets the alert that he has cut off his ankle monitor. Steve Queen, who worked with CSRP, which is the security company that was monitoring the ankle monitors at that time, he received the alert immediately. He happened to be up in the Cartersville area. He lived up there, so he called the police. They rushed to that pilot truck stop where the GPS was pinging, but they were 14 minutes too late. They found the ankle monitor. They did not find Richard Merritt. He had cut the ankle monitor with some kind of knife or instrument and thrown it out in a garbage can under a pizza box at a pilot truck stop. At 5 o'clock, the defendant had been ordered to turn himself into the Cobb County Jail, but he never did. He was long gone by then. Well, by this time, Mike Jeffcoat and some other family members had tried to communicate with Shirley. After 5, they got a call from the Cobb County Sheriff's Department learning that the defendant never turned himself in, and realizing that they had not heard from Shirley, they got really concerned. So they started calling 911 here in Cobb County. Officers, Sergeant John O'Bester and Officer Ashley Nelson from the Cobb County Police Department went out to Shirley's house, and you know what they found? They didn't find any signs of forced entry. They found that all of the windows were intact. There had been no signs of tampering. The garage door was closed, and let me tell you, they tried to get into that house. They arrived there at 5:39 p.m. and were there for actually a couple of hours. They looked into the windows. They didn't see any kind of signs of a struggle. But what they did see is Shirley Merritt's purse just sitting there, which they found to be very strange. They also saw the defendant's car. It was a black Honda. It was a car that Shirley had bought for him after she posted bond for him, and it was out in the driveway. Well, at this point, everyone was concerned and really worried for Shirley. Mike Jeffcoat made the decision the next morning to wake up early and drive from Birmingham to Georgia. He was able to get a key from the defendant's ex-wife for Shirley's house. He went in, and that's when he saw Shirley laying in the basement. He called 911 on February 2nd at 9:28 a.m., and that's when they arrived and started to investigate. A couple of things that I do want to go over about this case. First of all, we sent some items to the crime lab. We sent 3 items to the crime lab. One was the handle that had come off the knife that was used to kill Shirley. One was the dumbbell that had been used to bludgeon her in the head. We sent them off for fingerprints and for DNA testing. The results didn't show that the defendant didn't have his hands on those items. They were just inconclusive, which is kind of what was expected because of the materials that these items were made out of. They weren't like fabric, which would be something that would collect and hold on to DNA cells. So they just weren't able to get enough DNA cells off that dumbbell to sufficiently test. And it wasn't like the knife was made out of glass, which is something that would be able to kind of maintain fingerprints. They just weren't able to get anything off of them. Again, the lab technicians are going to explain this to you. They're going to say, listen, this doesn't mean that the defendant hadn't held these items. You're also going to hear that when Shirley Merritt's autopsy was performed, she had a clump of hair in her right hand. We sent those off to the lab as well. They were both microanalyzed, and their DNA was compared. All of the hairs that could be compared to Shirley Merritt's known hair were her known hair. And it makes sense because, as you will see, when she was found, she was crumpled up at the bottom of the stairs with her hands at her head, having been stabbed in the face. Another thing, you're going to see a lot of exhibits here, the testimony of several witnesses. I'm just going to tell you now, the exhibit numbers are not going to be in order, and I am not going to publish every exhibit on this screen. And that is for the privacy and for the sake of Shirley and her family, some of whom are sitting in court today. However, when you go out into deliberations, you will have the chance to see them. Finally, I know you all are probably sitting here wondering, what is it that I said that made them put me on this jury? And I'm going to tell you right now. It's not a secret. It's not some one thing that you said. You all are here because when we questioned you yesterday, you seem like the kind of folks who think using common sense. And that is your greatest asset as a juror. As you listen to the testimony and as you view the exhibit, I am going to ask them that you view them through the lens of common sense, which is what the law is going to ask you to do. And when you do, it's going to be very clear to you that the defendant is guilty of all these crimes. Because the facts of this case are very straightforward. I'm not saying that this is going to be an easy trial. We're going to throw a lot of testimony and a lot of exhibits at you. And you're going to be here listening to several witnesses during the course of the next few days. You're going to hear some heartbreaking things. And you're going to see some ugly, brutal photographs. But it all boils down to common sense. So please keep that in mind as you listen to these witnesses and review the evidence. Because if you do, I am confident that after reviewing all of the evidence in this case, you will come back with a verdict of guilty to malice murder, a verdict of guilty to both counts of felony murder, a verdict of guilty to both counts of aggravated assault, and finally, a verdict of guilty to possession of a knife